Welcome to my guide on Trigger. Watching the whole video will give you a better understanding of how Trigger functions and her role in any team, but if you're just looking for quick build recommendations, I will provide some at the end of the video. Please like and subscribe if you find the guide informative, and let's jump in. Trigger is an S-rank electric range stun unit from the Obol Defense Squad faction. She's an off-field unit with an extremely easy gameplay loop that requires minimal upkeep for high outputs of both damage and daze. Her unique character gauge doesn't require a lot of management to maintain, and even though Trigger will spend most of her time off-field, she will come on-field for short bursts to expend her energy and decibel. Trigger does this to hypercharge her attack frequency for a moment, boosting both her daze and damage output even more. Trigger is also incredibly flexible in her squad setup thanks to her low field time requirements, allowing for other units to shine while she constantly increases all damage done to enemies with her core passive. In short, Trigger is an amazing stun unit for almost any squad, old and new, and will be an incredible addition for anyone looking for a general purpose stun unit who also has a surprising amount of damage output. First up is Trigger's unique character gauge, located under her health bar. Trigger fills this gauge with a resource called Purge through basic attacks in her sniper stance. And while the gauge caps out at 100 Purge, it can be refilled at any point by just re-entering the sniper stance and firing off a couple more shots. Purge is then used as a resource when Trigger activates her off-field aftershock attacks, draining a small amount with each attack. At its core, this is all there is to the Purge gauge. However, we can temporarily pause some of the Purge drain and hypercharge Trigger's attack frequency by entering a state called the Coordinated Support state. By using Trigger's ultimate or EX special, she enters Coordinated Support, where the Purge gauge changes from a pulsating blue to a quicker pulsating orange. During this state, the attack rate of Trigger's standard off-field attacks are boosted and their Purge cost is removed. The state lasts for a duration and/or a set number of attacks, depending on what skill we use to activate Coordinated Support, and the state ends once either of these conditions reaches 0. However, the state isn't fixed and can technically be extended indefinitely provided we have unlimited resources. By combining an EX special and an ultimate, we can extend both the duration and number of attacks up to a cap of 20 seconds and 10 attacks. Once this cap is reached, using another EX special will not add any more time or attacks, as these limits cannot be exceeded. But if we expend 4 attacks and wait 8 seconds and then use another EX special, it will refresh the state, bringing it back to its maximum cap again. While on field, Trigger has 2 versions of her basic attacks. The first is her normal 4-hit combo, which we perform by just tapping the basic attack button. The 3 first hit of this combo do physical damage, with the 4th doing electric damage. But even though it's there, we should avoid ever using this combo. The second and more important version of the basic attack is Trigger's sniper stance, which we enter by holding down the basic attack button. Here, Trigger continuously shoots piercing shots at her main target, dealing electric damage with each shot. While in the sniper stance, each shot generates 25 Purge, fully filling the Purge gauge after 4 shots. While firing, we can move Trigger left, right, or backwards to adjust her position. Moving this way can activate a perfect dodge, causing Trigger to fire off a counterattack, dealing a good amount of both damage and daze and generating 25 Purge. While in the sniper stance, Trigger can also automatically evade an attack every 8 seconds, which also ends in a counterattack. Releasing the basic attack button at any point during the sniper stance will cause Trigger to unleash a finishing move and exit the stance. When this finishing move connects with an enemy, we're given a quick assist prompt for the previous squad member in line. This finisher doesn't generate any Purge, and the swap has a long 25-second cooldown, so make sure to cap out on Purge before ending the sniper stance. And if we want Trigger to exit the sniper stance without using a finisher, we can just tap the dodge button and she will instantly return to her neutral stance. Now, over to the most important part of Trigger's attack-oriented kit, her off-field aftershock attacks. There are 2 versions of these attacks, one we can consider her basic attack and one heavy attack. They are very similar but still different enough that I want to go over them separately. So first is the off-field basic attack. As long as Trigger has enough Purge, every time an on-field character hits an enemy with most normal attacks, Trigger will appear on field, consuming 3 Purge and fire off 2 piercing shots of electric damage at an enemy. During the attack, Trigger is invulnerable, and the attack itself is considered an aftershock attack. And there is an internal cooldown of 3 seconds between each time this attack can occur. When Trigger enters coordinated support, this 3-second internal cooldown and the purge cost of the attack is completely removed. And now for the heavy attack. Trigger's off-field heavy attack occurs when an on-field unit hits an enemy with some of their heavy attacks. We know that this attack has been activated when the large text "Fire" appears in the middle of our screen. When this happens, Trigger appears, firing off multiple shots and ends the attack with a finishing move. This attack costs 5 purge and has 2 charges each on a 20-second cooldown. This heavy attack isn't affected by the purge and internal cooldown removal of the coordinated support state, and thus will always require at least 5 purge to activate. It also takes priority over the other off-field attack and will immediately activate, ending the basic attack version early if it needs to. Both of these off-field attacks are AoE and will hit anything in Trigger's line of attacks, which is very nice in tandem with her core passive, which we'll get to in just a bit. Tapping the special attack button causes Trigger to lunge forward and slash at an enemy with the blade on her weapon, causing electric damage. This attack can be used to skip basic 1, but realistically we should never be in a position where we want to use either Trigger's basic attacks or her non-EX special attack. On the other hand, we have the much more important EX special. With at least 60 energy, we can use Trigger's EX special attack by tapping the EX special attack button. This causes Trigger to slash at an enemy and finish off the attack with a backwards jump shot. The attack has a very high motion value, both in terms of electric damage and daze. And when the final shot connects with an enemy, we get both a quick assist with the previous character in the squad, and it activates the coordinated support state. While this EX attack may seem very easy to use at first glance, there are a couple of things I want to highlight about it. As soon as we tap the EX special button, the required energy is immediately drained and Trigger is locked into the full attack animation. As soon as the attack animation starts, we can swap to another unit and Trigger will still finish the attack. However, the key part of the move, the jump shot that activates both the quick assist and the coordinated support, doesn't have any tracking. This makes it easy to miss, especially versus highly mobile targets, and losing out on entering a coordinated support state will be a big blow to both Trigger's damage and daze output. So the bottom line is, to maximize Trigger's power, make sure that the final shot connects with our target. Missing it means sacrificing significant damage and utility. Trigger's core passive is very simple but extremely strong. Whenever Trigger is off-field and any of her aftershock attacks hits an enemy, their stun damage multiplier is boosted by a percentage for 5 seconds. This boost is unique in that it applies not only during a stun window but also outside of it, meaning Trigger continuously amplifies the damage enemies take. So Trigger's core passive is where most of the important part of her utility lies, followed by her high daze output and very respectable damage. Trigger's additional ability is activated when she's paired with an attack unit or another electric unit. When active, Trigger's daze output from her aftershock attacks is increased by 1.5% for every 1% of crit rate above 40% crit rate, up to a maximum of 75% increased daze. Activating this ability is vital when it comes to getting the most out of Trigger's kit, since almost all of her damage and daze output comes from her off-field aftershock attacks. Reaching the minimum of 40% crit rate to start gaining a value from this ability can be a bit of a struggle, but definitely doable, and we'll go over how in the gearing and stats sections. Furthermore, reaching the cap of this bonus will require Trigger to have 90% crit rate, which is possible but very improbable without her signature W engine. Trigger has a standard dodge in all directions, which can be combined with a dash attack causing physical damage. This dash attack allows her to skip basic 1. Her dodge counter causes electric damage and skips both basic 1 and 2 if we continue the basic attack string. Trigger's quick assist is a fast retort of electric damage which also skips basic 1 and 2. She has a defensive assist, which she can follow up with an attack of high electric damage and a good amount of daze. Trigger's chain attack is a very quick 3-shot attack of electric damage. The motion value of the attack isn't that impressive by itself, but we shouldn't skip out on using it during a chain attack because the attack animation is very short and it won't be enough to cause its stun damage multiplier to fall off, since Trigger will continue her aftershock attacks during other squad members' chain attacks. On the other hand, Trigger's ultimate is very strong, both in terms of damage and daze. The ultimate also enters Trigger into coordinated support for an extended duration, making it a very important skill to use and keep track of. However, just like Trigger's EX special, the attack has to connect with an enemy for her to gain the coordinated support state. So make sure not to use it when an enemy is about to phase out or become invulnerable for some reason. Now for the skill leveling priorities. Trigger only has 2 mandatory things to level up. The first is her core passive, since it's where her main utility comes from. And applying a constant 35% damage increase, which it does at max rank, is too good to pass up on. Then next is her basic attacks. A majority of Trigger's damage and days output will come from her basic attacks, so spending resources on them is the natural thing to do. Then, next in line are Trigger's special attack, followed by her ultimate. Since Trigger will spend almost all of her time off field, her energy regen and decibel generation will be lower compared to an on-field unit. However, we will be focusing on using them a lot to activate coordinated support, which is at the core of Trigger's gameplay, so having higher motion values on these attacks will just be a straight up damage increase. The last skill we need to consider leveling up is Trigger's assist. Attacks tied to her assists have high motion values when it comes to days output especially, so leveling it up isn't mandatory, but it will be a nice bonus to have. As for Trigger's dodge, we can skip it completely. It doesn't provide anything outside of the normal damage increases, and realistically we should never be in a position where we have to use a dodge for an attack purpose on Trigger. It's better just to save resources than leveling up this skill. There are very few things to keep in mind while bringing Trigger into a squad. As long as we start a combat scenario by filling out her purge gauge, and then make sure that it never completely empties, we already have an incredible value out of Trigger as a unit. Depending on the length of a fight, we might never even have to refill the gauge considering how little purge each attack drains. And if we bring in the coordinated support state into the equation, the purge gauge lasts for a ridiculous amount of attacks. However, I have mentioned it before, but I again want to highlight the importance of properly using her EX special and ultimate. During the course of combat, we really have to make sure not to miss these attacks, because losing out on the coordinated support state is a big blow to Trigger's damage and days output. Trigger's energy and decibel are more important resources compared to most other units, and while she generates a bit more compared to a completely off-field unit, she still generates significantly less compared to an on-field one. Therefore, proper usage of these resources are going to bring Trigger up from a great unit to an amazing one. It's not too difficult to do, just something to keep in mind to make sure that they always connect with enemies. With how important the coordinated support state is for Trigger, there are a lot of times when we want to get the maximum value out of it. And to reach the max duration out of the state, I would always recommend us to start with the ultimate and then use the EX special for consistency reasons. Because the ultimate takes priority over the EX animation, meaning there's a risk of cancelling the EX attack before the jump shot hits, making it so we lose out on the activation of the coordinated support state from the EX attack. The ultimate also has a higher interrupt level, making it easier to land the next EX special since the enemy will be standing still for a moment after the attack hits them. Continuing with the coordinated support state. During combat, we will constantly have to make a decision on whether to use it for damage or for days. What I mean by this is that when we use an ultimate plus EX special combo for the 20-second 10 attack version of the coordinated support state, we have to pick either to save it for when an enemy becomes stunned for its damage component, or if we want to use it to more quickly reach a stun window. One choice isn't inherently better than the other, and it comes down to how we want to make use of Trigger in a squad. Like, will she take on the role of a pure stunner or a stun DPS hybrid? With all this said, during combat while using Trigger, there are only really 5 things we need to keep in mind. And they are: do I have enough purge? How are my energy and decibel levels? Will my next EX/ultimate connect if I use it now? How do I want to use my next coordinated support state? How long until the next off-field heavy attack? Then there are the swap cancels for the EX special and the sniper stance finisher to keep in mind as well, but they aren't necessary for the most part. In terms of maintenance, Trigger is on a similar level to Astra. We have to do very little and still reap a massive reward just by bringing her into a squad. Trigger's signature engine, Spectral Gaze, is her best option. At rank 1 and level 60, the engine provides 713 base attack and 24% crit rate as an advanced stat. The engine effect reduces enemy defense by 25% for 5 seconds when they are hit by the equipper's electric aftershock damage. Very specific. If the damage occurs when the equipper is off field, they gain a buff called Spirit Lock, which can stack up to 3 times and lasts for 12 seconds. Each stack of the Spirit Lock's duration is calculated separately and gives the equipper 4% impact for a total of 12% at max stacks. And at max stacks, there's an additional increase of 8% to the equipper's impact. So in total, when everything is active, this engine provides 20% impact, 25% def reduction to enemies, and 24% crit rate. Spectral Gaze is going to be difficult to use for any future units with how specific the conditions for the engine effects are. That said, for Trigger, this engine will have an absolutely insane value and will be more or less a requirement if we want to cap out the bonus on her additional ability. Signature engines with an advanced stat specific to the intended unit makes it hard for other options to compete. Stun engines will almost always have impact as an advanced stat, and with units like Trigger, who wants an offensive stat like crit rate for her scaling ability, it will make it more or less impossible to reach the max value of such an ability without the specific advanced stat. That said, Trigger already has a very high daze output and doesn't need to cap out her additional ability, so getting this W engine definitely isn't a requirement, and mostly just comes down to opening up more varied build options. The more accessible options we have access to are 6-shooter from the Battle Pass, and the Steam Oven or Precious Fossilized Core from the Gadget Store. While all of these are valid options to use, the 2 Gadget Store options come with big disclaimers on them. The Fossilized Core, while incredible when it works, has a cutoff limit where the engine effect becomes void, and using the Steam Oven will require a fair bit of energy management on top of everything else. So if you don't mind playing around these engine effects, you can pick whatever option has the higher engine rank, since in the end this is the main differentiator between the A rank options. But if you don't want to deal with any of the disclaimers on your engines and just want a set and forget option, the 6-shooter is your best bet. And while it does get better with higher ranks, it is fully functional even at rank 1. If we extend our options to other characters' A rank engines, Pulchra's Box Cutter and Ambi's Damara Battery can also be great options. Box Cutter is another solid stun option, but if we instead would like to focus on damage, the Damara Battery has an unconditional increase of electric damage and occasionally increases energy regen. Both are very good options depending on what we want to get out of Trigger as a unit. Then finally, out of the S-rank options from the Residual Signal shop, I only recommend Lycon's the Restrained. This engine is actually an incredible option for Trigger since the engine effect boosts both the damage and daze output of basic attacks, which Trigger's off-field damage just happen to be. It has an easy to activate and upkeep engine effect and is just an amazing option if you have access to it. So while there is a stun path or a damage path to go down with Trigger, it only really applies to the A rank options. Otherwise, my recommended priority is as follows: Signature, the Restrained, Damara Battery for a damage option, and for a stun option, just any of the A rank stun engines. Just as with Trigger's A rank engine options, we have to choose to go down either a damage path or a daze path when it comes to picking a 4-piece drive disc set. One isn't inherently better than the other, so it just comes down to preference and what we want to get out of Trigger as a unit. For the damage path, we'll pick the Shadow Harmony set for the 2-piece increase to aftershock damage and the 4-piece boost to both crit rate and combat attack. Both are stats Trigger wants and make great use of. Then, if we instead want to go down the daze path, we'd go for the Shockstar Disco for the increased impact from the 2-piece bonus, and 20% extra daze to basic attacks from the 4-piece bonus. As for the 2-piece option, Woodpecker Electro is the only choice I would recommend, because we need all the extra crit rate stats we can get to reach the minimum of 40% crit rate required for Trigger to start gaining value out of her additional ability. One thing to consider when picking a set is to think about what type of squad we want to run Trigger with. For example, in a squad with 2 stun units, there will be a lot of daze output already, and Trigger could gain more value from being a hybrid DPS stun unit with the Shadow Harmony set over running a pure daze focused setup. And on the other hand, if Trigger is the only stun unit in a squad, going for a Shockstar Disco set might be the preferred option. Just take your preferred pick and perhaps even save up 2 sets so you can swap, depending on the playstyle you prefer. The options for Trigger's drive disc main stats are somewhat limited. We're gonna want to use crit rate for disc 4, electric damage or attack percent for disc 5, and impact on disc 6. These stats are all fairly self-explanatory, but let's just quickly go over them. We use crit rate in slot 4 to assist with reaching the baseline 40% crit rate that we need to start gaining a value from Trigger's additional ability. For disc 5, we'd prefer electric damage over attack percent, but use whichever has the better substats. For most units, their corresponding elemental damage increase does have a higher value, especially if they don't have any innate or other external way of increasing it. Finally, for slot 6, we use impact. There are so few ways of increasing impact, and with Trigger being a stun unit, getting her impact as high as possible is a no-brainer. When it comes to substats, we can completely tunnel vision on crit rate with the goal of reaching 90% if we want to. That way we'll get the most out of Trigger's stun capabilities at the cost of damage. However, depending on disc and engine setup, getting this much crit rate will in most cases require an obscene amount of rolls. Just for a reference, here are a couple of setups and how many rolls each needs to reach the 90% cap. As you can see, without the signature engine, it's almost a fool's errand to even try to go for the crit rate cap. So instead, I recommend a more balanced approach, especially with how high of an attack frequency Trigger has as an off-field character. It would almost be a waste not to give her any damaging stats. Therefore, ideally, we look for a solid middle ground of crit rate and offensive stats. As always, look for discs with at least 2 useful stats on them, and in this case, one of them should be crit rate. The other should be either attack percent or crit damage, and in an ideal scenario, all 3 are on there, with the final stat being a flat attack boost. So decide for yourself to either tunnel vision completely on any discs with multiple rolls of crit rate on them, or aim for a more balanced setup where we include crit damage and attack percent as well. Now for a quick summary of Trigger's Mindscapes. M1 increases the stun damage multiplier from 35 to 55%, reduces the internal cooldown of her off-field basic attacks by 1 second, and increases the max amount of purge from 100 to 125, and the purge gain from purge generating attacks by 25%. M2 gives Trigger a buff when an aftershock or the finishing move in the sniper stance hits an enemy. The buff stacks up to 4 times and increases the whole squad's crit damage by 24% at max stacks. M4 adds a nuke of both damage and daze when her different aftershock attacks hits an enemy. And finally, M6 gives Trigger a new on-field mechanic where she does increased nukes of damage during her sniper stance. As always, Trigger doesn't need any of these bonuses, so never feel the need to pull for more than a single copy. Trigger is an incredibly versatile stun unit that can be slotted into almost any squad setup. She's a powerhouse when it comes to both damage increases and daze output, since the damage increase is constant and she has minimal field time requirements. So any attack unit that wants a lot of field time will enjoy the increased damage and fast stun build up. A note on Soldier Zero, Ambi and Trigger. Damage wise, Trigger will see the highest increase when paired with Ambi, but she's definitely not locked into Ambi as a squad mate. The reality is that Ambi gains a lot more from being paired with Trigger than Trigger gains from being with Ambi. They do have great synergies, but not enough to overshadow any other squads that could make use of Trigger's kit, which is a very good thing for the future of the game. To show what I mean when I say that Trigger can fit into almost any squad, I'll go over a couple of different setups I recommend where all units have their additional ability requirements met. A mono electric squad. This setup uses Trigger and Rina as the core, with the DPS being interchangeable between any of the electric units we have. I also added in a Miyabi team here since I wasn't able to find a place for it anywhere else. But with how strong the Miyabi-Yanagi combo is, it is worth mentioning their increased power together with Trigger. For the mono electric squad setup, I recommend using a stun focused Trigger, except in the Soldier Zero Ambi team. Actually, whenever we pair Ambi and Trigger together, I would always recommend using the Shadow Harmony set for Trigger, since her damage output will be so much higher thanks to Ambi's core passive and additional ability. A standard stun support squad. This is the basic setup a lot of attack units enjoy. The only attack unit I would avoid using with this setup is Zhujuan, since she wants to do her damage inside of stun windows. And with this setup, the attack unit will take up most of the field time. For this setup, I would also recommend a stun focused Trigger. A double stun setup. Here the focus lies on reaching stun windows quickly and often, so that our attack unit can unleash most of their damage during the stun damage multiplier. For this setup, I recommend using a DPS focused Trigger here since she shares the burden of daze output with another unit. There are more teams Trigger can fit into since I didn't really bring up any A rank units as options here. But hopefully this gives you an idea of what teams Trigger will fit into now and in the future. I hope you were able to get something valuable out of this video and that it will improve your gameplay while using Trigger. Please like the video if you learned something and subscribe for more guides. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.